Good morning. Our topic today is the effects of historical events on superheroes. We started off with our question, have historical events had an impact on superheroes' characteristics, which then led to our thesis. Large events in history to present day tend to have an impact on superheroes. Today we'll be starting off with the feminist movement's effect on Wonder Woman. So when Wonder Woman was first created, it occurred during women's increased use of contraceptives, which was pioneered by a woman named Margaret Sanger. She had a niece by the name of Olive Byrne, who was the mistress to the creator of Wonder Woman, and had a major impact on the story. Byrne, along with the reproductive rights movement and taking their rights back, led Marston to confront the Superman publisher and demand that there be a female-led comic. However, at the time, feminism hadn't made much of an impact on the male population. So Marston's co-workers discouraged him from creating an all-powerful female superhero. So he decided to give her some submissive qualities, such as Aphrodite's Law, and because of this, women were less interested in Wonder Woman, because it didn't appeal to them as much. So as mentioned, Aphrodite's Law, it was inspired by a true event in England in which women changed themselves to the gates of Buckingham Palace as protest, which led to this. I don't know if any of you feel very empowered by this. Raise your hands. No, didn't think so. So the bondage was actually a metaphor for the issues that women were facing at the time, which was whether or not they should be allowed to adopt children, whether the right to choose that, and the pay gap. 7 years later, we're still facing these issues. So, however, there are many contrasts between the original Wonder Woman and the new Wonder Woman movie. The movie version makes many jabs at the typical tropes of female superheroes, such as costume malfunctions, etc. As well, the movie lacks the intense sexual undertones and the bondage element, and instead goes on to attack issues such as sexual assault. And this can be linked back to the No More campaign, which gained notoriety and popularity during the time of production.
And even before Wonder Woman was used to appeal to the press masses, there was Superman. So Superman was created by two Jewish authors, and their names were Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel. And so during World War II, Hitler was murdering millions of Jews. Obviously, the authors didn't like that, so they changed Superman from being strictly fictional into that. And as you can see, there's a pretty big difference, right? First of all, Superman here, he's fighting a car and like thugs and stuff, and here, he's fighting Nazis and tanks. And if you pay attention to that comic book cover, you can see Superman is portrayed as bright and bold and on the front lines and fighting Nazis without any fear, while the Nazis are portrayed as weak and helpless. And also, if you pay attention to that advertisement there, it says war bonds and stamps smash Axis tanks too. So basically this is inspiring the comic book's audience, which is mainly children, to also support the war effort financially through war bonds and stamps, which are relatively cheap at the time. And so, the effect on the public. So basically, these comics books were used as like a form of propaganda by the U.S. government to get the public on their side and to boost morale and everything, since Nazis looked really weak, and then Superman was like a leader to them. And so it also rallied hate against the Nazis. And then another change in Superman that affected the army was that 23 special editions were produced specifically to educate the largely illiterate and uneducated army at the time. And so basically, it also reinforced Superman's role as a leader, and also gave another purpose to comic books other than to entertain, which is to educate, and that's a special edition. And so basically, World War II affected Superman heavily, which also in turn affected the outcome of World War II. Okay.
Next up, we're going to look at another comic book franchise that was created essentially to combat oppression and prejudice, but for a different group of people. So in 1963, the XMen were created by two comic book legends, essentially, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. At the same time, you had the Civil Rights Movement, which was essentially one of the largest movements for equality in the United States. The X-Men were designed to combat racism and prejudice as they were given specific powers that essentially made them different from normal people in society. And as a result, they were discriminated against, they were seen as mutants, they were given the same treatment that African Americans were given at that time. In an exclusive interview in 2004, Stan Lee actually referred to the comic book as a good metaphor for what was going on in the United States at the time. As time passed, it developed. It went on to combat more current issues such as gender inequality. And this is a pretty big deal because women are seen as lesser characters than men, as all the major characters or superheroes are men. A way they combated this was through having more female-dominant characters. Like you see Bryan Singer, who's a director, said that he's empowering people, especially young women and children, by incorporating more female characters.
The X-Men were not the first to be created to combat and affected by bigotry. So we'll be looking at Captain America and the Holocaust. So some background, Captain America was made in 1941 by Jewish creators Joseph Joe Simon and Jacob Jack Cutsford Kirby. He was created 6 months before the Pearl Harbor attack. Also, Nazi propaganda spread to the U.S., which led to anti-Semitism becoming a common thing within the states. This also led to Joseph and Jacob changing their names because they wanted to mask their Jewish identities. Also, they also saw Adolf Hitler as their perfect villain against Captain America. Joe even said in an interview with the Associated Press that there he was, Adolf Hitler, he was a perfect bad guy, much better than anything he could have made up. So Captain America as a role model, Simon and Kirby, like other Jews at the time, were drawn to Captain America by his use of wise and justly power. Also because Captain America became a role model to American soldiers that were fighting overseas, their comments were shipped to them and they gained more hope and patriotism. Also, they encouraged people from home to contribute to the war, especially the government, which wanted comic industries to create more American morale. And Captain America was even seen delivering supplies, helping stop spies, and helping soldiers. And finally, he became a symbol of patriotism and hope. As you can see, he's representing the colors of America and the American flag and such. And he boosted people's spirits and became America's moral compass.
Okay, so all in all, historical events pretty much affected superheroes by changing their characteristics, but also spawning some of their creations. And but some limitations to this was most of this change